Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you are doing well today. My name is Sarah Bronin, and I help lead the National Zoning Atlas, which is a collaborative research project that works to make zoning data actionable and accessible to improve how we use our land. So really appreciate everybody being here today. We are really excited to launch our first statewide report, Zoning Report Colorado, and share with you some of the findings about zoning conditions in the state. So as we turn to our panelists, I just wanted to introduce everybody. I'll actually end with Brian. Joining me from the National Zoning Atlas are Devin Chodson, a project manager, Tara Safavian, a geospatial analyst. Both will introduce themselves a little later in the presentation, and these two representatives today represent a pretty big team of about 30 people who work at the National Zoning Atlas and help us decode zoning. They're one of a number of staff members, interns, and others that have worked in Colorado, but their experience in other states, I think they might be sharing a bit about that and how Colorado compares. But it's a real pleasure to introduce Brian Rosbert, who is the Executive Director of Housing Colorado, our partner organization in this effort, the leading housing advocacy organization in Colorado, who has, through their work on the ground in Colorado and through connections with us and many others, really shined a light about how land use regulations impact Coloradans, their housing accessibility and affordability. So I'm actually going to turn it over to him for a moment to help frame what's at stake in Colorado when we talk about zoning. And with that, Brian, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I think you really hit the nail on the head and just talking about how land use and zoning plays a part in our affordability crisis. And I know that we'll get into that throughout this webinar. Again, my name is Brian Rosbert. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Colorado. We're a nonprofit membership association representing about 300 different organizations around the state. Everyone from accountants and attorneys to contractors and frontline service providers. So we represent the interests of the affordable housing community in the state and advocate for policies that really make a difference in bringing about affordable housing development and preservation in the state. We do have a housing crisis here in the state. We are the eighth least affordable place to live in our country. And we know that there are a number of ways to come at this problem and combat our crisis. And so we are working hard to do that through policy change at the state and ever more at the local level. And we know that talking about land use and talking about zoning and making it easier to build in our communities is an important um, task at hand. And so we're thankful for this project because it really seeks to demystify and open up the land use and zoning apparatus in our state so that's more accessible to not only local housing advocates, but also local elected officials. Hopefully with this tool, we're going to be able to shine a light on what is an opaque process and an opaque system and really start to see some change in our communities. So we're working hard on this. We've worked hard on this project. We're really thankful for Sarah and her team and all the work that they put in over the last close to 16 months to get this zoning atlas, the Colorado Zoning Atlas, up and live, as well as to put together the final report that is a first of its kind in the country. So I'll turn it back to Sarah and just thank you for your work, your team, and all that you've done to help us in our state.
Thank you, Brian. And, we wouldn't have been able to do this without your support. In fact, I think you even had interns getting codes for us in some of the small towns in the state. So you were with us the whole way, and we really appreciate that. I also wanted to thank some of our other partners, Arnold Ventures, which has been one of our partners in not just Colorado, but 5 other states. We are hoping to finish with Arnold Ventures North Carolina in the near future. So stay tuned for that. That's quite a naughty state with naughty KNOTTY in that it has twice the number of jurisdictions as Colorado. So wish us luck. But we also want to thank Carrie Mareskowicz and her team at the University of Colorado, Denver. The students from UC Denver really got us started by filling out a lot of the information in the Denver metro area. Our team picked up on that, and we really are grateful for all of those students' contributions. We love students in our work. We always include interns in our processes. So if you are a student out there, please let us know if you're interested in that. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn to the table of contents for our conversation today. First, I think we should zoom out a little bit big picture, talk about the National Zoning Atlas itself. Why we are doing this for communities across the country, including communities in Colorado. We'll turn next to how we make the atlas. Some of the folks we've heard from on prior webinars really like to get under the hood. Tara is going to lead us through how you can use the NZA, so please have your laptop or phone ready to go in that part of the presentation, and then we'll get to the meat of it, which is how Colorado zones. But thinking about why we started this project in the first place, so why the NZA? We kind of think about our mission in 3 different respects. So digitizing, demystifying, and democratizing. Brian used the word demystifying in his comments. When we say we're digitizing, what we're trying to do is we are trying to take lots of different information, including information that has not been digitized. Lots of zoning maps have not been digitized, and put them into a centralized repository. When we say demystify, we talk about trying to expose zoning conditions, and to do so in a way that allows for apples to apples comparisons of zoning rules. And then when we say democratize, that actually motivated the Atlas in the first place. We wanted to help advocates and people who wanted to see their communities evolve, to empower them with the information that they need in order to change these very important rules, zoning regulations for good. Zooming out to the country, we can see in this slide an image of the National Zoning Atlas, and this is where your first URL to follow along. We'll repeat it in a little bit. But when you go to this website, you see the atlas itself. Tara is going to tell us what these purples and grays mean, but anywhere that's purple or gray is an area that we've done. So you can actually see we've worked in the Colorado vicinity, on New Mexico, on Arizona, Nevada, a bunch in Montana, and even Texas. We're getting through some of that. But the project itself is meant to, across all of these different states and all of these different communities, really paint a much clearer picture than we've ever had before about zoning. When we have completed zoning atlases, they have actually led to change in some places. Montana, the second zoning atlas, at least for the big states in Montana, that was completed, actually saw statewide zoning reform. They called it the Montana Miracle. We've seen that happen in Connecticut, in Texas, in the recent legislative session on manufactured housing. Our data helped to inform legislation there that successfully passed. We've also seen the NZA data being used in analysis. So our own excellent analysts have done a lot of different, not only looking at the codes themselves, but secondary analysis of the data, using information from New Mexico and several other states. 2 of our analysts published something in Zoning Practice that said, maybe not a surprise to anybody familiar with zoning, but it said that there's often mismatches between zoning texts and zoning maps to the tune of maybe 30% of jurisdictions. We've also seen our data being paired with other data. So the report on the right, if you're familiar with Long Island, there's Long Island and Manhattan there. We jointly authored a report with the Regional Plan Association about zoning code, housing locations, and sea level rise. So whether it's advocacy, analysis, or research, we've really tried to use the data for pretty hopefully powerful and increasingly important ends as we expose what zoning does and how it works. So when we think bigger picture about how we can use the data in the National Zoning Atlas to improve zoning, we think about this certainly as a tool, as Devin's about to point out, that digs into the details of housing. And so today our focus in the zoning report, Colorado, is about housing. But we can also think about how zoning might help us prepare for climate change, the links between zoning development and transit, the social and environmental impacts of development, the impacts of zoning on economic growth, including on small businesses, having diversified and mixed use communities, and so on. And then finally, a topic we have not yet explored, but I would really like to, the impact of zoning on our food supply. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Devin, who's going to explain how we make the zoning atlas, so you can then understand how we got to where we got when we talk about Colorado. Go ahead, Devin.
Thank you, Sarah. So just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Devin. I'm currently a project manager. Before I was a project manager, I was a zoning code analyst, and in that role, I worked to analyze some of Colorado. I've also been on NZA teams in many other places, including Hawaii, Massachusetts, New York, New Mexico, and most recently in Pennsylvania. So, our process starts with identifying jurisdictions, cities, towns, counties, and in Colorado, all municipalities have the right to exercise zoning, as do counties for unincorporated territory. Here are some of the jurisdictions in Colorado. Some choose not to zone. You can see two of them here. Aguilar and Ariba have chosen not to zone. Each zoned jurisdiction is made up of zoning districts, and each district has different rules. Here are some of the districts in Brighton. It has 29 districts in total. Some allow residential development, and some do not. When we figure out that a jurisdiction does have zoning, we collect the two main components of the zoning code, the zoning text and the zoning map. On your screen, you can see the text and the map that we used on our analysis of Carbondale. The NZA team then completes two work streams per jurisdiction, text analysis and geospatial analysis. Text analysts obtain zoning texts, specify a list of zoning districts, and extract key data points following our standardized methodology. And geospatial analysts obtain the zoning map, specify a list of districts, and digitize the zoning map, whether that's digitizing a static map or standardizing existing geospatial data. It's along that list of districts that the two work streams can join. Given my work in a few other states, I can say that every state is slightly different. And in Colorado, we've had some unique difficulties. Tara will mention this one.
This is a map of Cripple Creek and Teller County, Colorado, and it's a great example of one of the difficulties on the GIS side. I had to work to align the boundaries of hundreds of mining parcels with zoning data, and this type of parcel makes the data cleanup very time-consuming. Thanks, Devin.
And then in my experience on the text side, in growing cities like Denver, Fort Collins, Loveland, I observed several hybrid Euclidean and form-based codes that were changing regularly. These were really challenging to log and really challenging to reconcile both on the map side and the text side. And even then, we're still missing about 16 codes from places where we just simply could not get responses from jurisdictions that may not have put their information online, but indicated that they might have regulations. I will pass it on to Tara to describe a little bit about how to use the National Zoning Atlas.
Hey everyone. Again, my name is Tara. I'm a zoning code and geospatial analyst currently working on the California Zoning Atlas team, which is a pretty big task. Before that, I was responsible for a lot of the GIS analysis and data cleanup in Colorado. The range of codes in Colorado is much bigger than what we see in California. There are a lot of very rural areas and small towns that have much simpler codes than those in comparable places in California. We're now going to walk through how to use the interactive map and get the most out of its features. To follow along with me, you should head to zoningatlas.org/atlas. You can use a computer or mobile phone, but know that the size of the map will be different for both. While you get set up, I'll again share the view of the map at the national scale, including Alaska and Hawaii. The colored in areas indicate our total progress. You can see that we have 11 states plus DC completely integrated into the atlas. California, Virginia, and North Carolina are nearing completion, and many major metro areas are already completed, including several in Texas, Tennessee, and New York State. These published areas add up to over 7,200 jurisdictions. About 2/3 of these jurisdictions are confirmed to have zoning, and we have confirmed that the remaining third do not have zoning. Within these zone jurisdictions, we've analyzed and published over 78,000 zoning districts, and our analysts have read over 816,000 pages of zoning codes as well. These places are home to about half of the nation's residents and also cover over half of its total land. All right, now let's dive into the interactive map. Here again is the link for your convenience. The map opens up at the national scale where the legend reflects the zoned status of the jurisdictions in purple and gray. The areas shown in white are yet to be analyzed and integrated into the NZA. If you have the tribal land and protected layers on, you will also see these green and green-brown layers in Colorado and other Western states. In the legend and layer options box in the upper left corner, you have a few options to toggle on and off additional layers and features. You can also change the base map here. Now we'll use the zoom and filter box to explore a chosen geography. We've selected Colorado, of course, in the state dropdown, and the map zoomed into that state. We have the option to be even more specific with our geography selection. We selected Colorado Springs in the Select dropdown. The map zoomed to Colorado Springs and outlined the jurisdiction in black. Please note that you can only select one jurisdiction at a time here. At this scale, you should notice that the legend updates to show the zoning district type. Light purple areas indicate primarily residential districts, meaning these districts are primarily zoned for residential uses. Dark purple areas indicate mixed with residential districts, meaning these districts allow a mix of residential and non-residential uses. Tan areas indicate non-residential districts, meaning residential as a primary use is prohibited. These are typically zones allowing industrial uses or other non-residential uses like airports or open space. Now, let's apply filters to the map. The Show Me Where People Can Build box has options for quick filtering, like to show where missing middle housing or apartments are allowed. We toggled on the single family homes filter, and you can see the map lost some color. Areas remained colored in when their criteria satisfied the selected filters. In other words, this means that you can build a single family home anywhere the map is light or dark purple. In the lower right corner, the filtering results box calculates the zoned areas and the number of districts that satisfy the filtering criteria. According to these results, 59% of zoned acres in Colorado Springs, or 47% of zoning districts, allow single-family housing by right. Note that the filtering results only shows calculations for the single selected jurisdiction. Now let's look at the advanced filters box. You should use it for selecting more specific filtering criteria, like whether 1, 2, 3, or 4+ unit housing is also subject to a public hearing, minimum parking requirement, or height caps, among other options. We've selected criteria where 4+ family housing is allowed as of right and has a minimum parking requirement. According to the filtering results, 18% of zoned areas in Colorado Springs satisfy this criteria. Now I will hand it on back to Devin. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. So now we'll discuss a little more specifically how Colorado exercises its zoning. Now that you have seen the map, we want to focus on these details, and I encourage you to check out Zoning Report Colorado, which we just published last week. I want to acknowledge the authors of this report, who pulled together what Tara, myself, and other analysts inputted into a much fuller and much more rich narrative about the current state of zoning in Colorado. We're going to start with some statewide figures to provide a sense of how all of these zoning codes add up statewide. We analyzed over 53,000 pages of zoning codes, and across those zone jurisdictions, there are nearly 4,200 zoning districts, for which we could collect roughly 200 data points for each district. As you can see here, most of the jurisdictions in the state are zoned or shown in purple. 82% of Colorado's 334 jurisdictions exercise zoning authority. Unzoned areas are represented in gray and are concentrated in agricultural eastern counties, but there are unzoned municipalities and counties dotting the rest of the state. From an acreage perspective, even though 82% of jurisdictions zone, just 41% of Colorado's land is subject to zoning primarily. That's mostly because 40% of land is designated protected land. 2% of that land is under tribal authority, and 15% is deliberately unzoned. Still, zoning is very consequential in Colorado because it covers land where 99% of its inhabitants live. Of zoned land, 98% allows residential development of some type. This is a fairly high figure. Just to provide a little bit of contrast, only 65% of zoned land in Nevada allows for residential development. Residential development either occurs in primarily residential districts, these light purple ones, or mixed with residential districts, the darker purple, which Tara described earlier. By land area, 92% of land allowing residential development allows 1 unit per lot by right, compared to 33% of land allowing 2 units by right. Just 5% of residential land across the state allows 3 units per lot by right, with 3% allowing 4 or more by right. This chart is really important. It says that not a lot of land in Colorado freely allows for the type of housing that's most likely to be affordable. On this slide, we can add another dimension to the cost of housing in Colorado. 98% of land area is subject to a minimum lot size, which requires a certain amount of land before a dwelling unit can be built. There is a lot of land in Colorado, 86% of single-family residential land, that requires 2 or more acres. We think these are some of the highest lot size mandates we have ever seen in our analysis. Much of mountainous western Colorado requires 35 acres per residential lot. Lot sizes under half an acre or a quarter acre are rare by land area. As you might guess, they are mostly found in highly urbanized areas. We also looked at the ways that residential development was burdened by parking mandates. On 85% of residential land in Colorado, local governments say that people have to build a certain number of parking spaces if they want to build housing. Much of Colorado requires at least 2 parking spaces per housing unit. Only 22 zoned jurisdictions do not have parking mandates. We've enumerated those in the report. I want to bring up one last type of housing that might be affordable to people, and that is the accessory dwelling unit. This is the granny flat or the in-law suite, something that you would build on the same lot as a single-family home. According to our analysis, 37% of single-family zoned land in Colorado prohibits ADU construction, and nearly 80 jurisdictions do not permit ADUs at all. Where they've been allowed, occupancy restrictions abound and they can extend indefinitely. However, recent state legislation has addressed some of these restrictions to legalize more ADUs, but mostly in highly urbanized areas. We'll update the map to show local changes made in response to that state law soon. But this is yet another indicator of the overall trend we observe in the report, and that is that zoning is very restrictive, blocking the types of housing that more Coloradans want more of. I'll pass it over to Sarah for some regional findings.
Thank you so much, Devin. So Devin gave us a sense of the statewide trends. And actually, when we first talked to Brian about our additional statewide findings, we sort of talked and said, this is great. And it paints a picture, sort of an overall picture of all of these aggregate rules across the, what was it, 53,000 pages of zoning codes. That's intense. But what we decided that in addition to the statewide analysis, we should try to think about Colorado zoning, both in terms of different types of communities and in different types of geographies. So I'm going to start with this chart, which is the first part of part 5 of the report. And what this chart does is it shows where 5 different types of communities are located in Colorado. And those 5 types are rural communities, small towns, outer suburbs, inner suburbs, and urban cores. And so this is a little bit hard to see probably at this scale, but if you check out the report online, you should be able to see a few more dots than you can see. It looks right now like a sea of purple, so a sea of rural areas. We found some really interesting trends when we did this. And so we found that just 2% of land in rural communities is zoned to allow for multifamily housing. We found that across the board, multifamily, when I say multifamily here, I'm talking about 4 or more family housing. So that last category of housing that Devin showed, and the title of this chart is 4 or more family permitting. That dark blue again shows where that kind of housing was permitted as of right. And you see that very small percentage, the very small amount of blue in the rural areas. Perhaps not surprisingly, we found that more land in communities classified as urban cores was designated for multifamily housing, 4 or more family housing as of right. But jump back up to the second bar and you'll see that line that says small towns. I think probably one of the most interesting things that we found was that small towns, communities that were outside of metro areas, maybe standalone communities, in their own right, or maybe surrounded by more rural areas, but certainly out of the urban core periphery, that these small towns actually zoned as a percentage of land more of their housing for more of their land for 4 or more family housing than even inner suburbs, even outer suburbs, certainly. So I don't know what that means in terms of policy, but I do think it's something for folks who are looking more deeply at what our findings might suggest for policy solutions. Look at those small town findings in terms of their permissiveness for multifamily housing and consider why that happens. And I think small towns in Colorado deserve some props for that. We also looked at the Denver area itself. So the Denver metropolitan area is actually a metro area that has 3 principal cities: Denver, Aurora, and Centennial. But we looked at a number of places around Denver. And on the next slide, you'll see a couple of charts. We're just going to show 2 of our cross sections for the Denver metro area. The top line on both charts is Denver, so the central city itself. We found, in not surprisingly, again, perhaps, this chart on the left showing single family permitting, that single family housing is allowed by right except for Westminster, interestingly, in the majority of land in all of the places that we studied, so that we pulled out for this chart: Denver, Arvada, Aurora, Lakewood, Littleton, and Westminster. Now, we realized later that Westminster is a bit of an outlier because much of its land actually is assigned to a planned unit development district. So these are we're getting down already into some of these arcane rules. But if you look Littleton and above, again, much of the land is devoted to single family housing. The chart on the right indicates the percentage of residential land that allows for 4 or more family housing. The dark blue is as of right. The gray is prohibited, and then that sort of light blue is allows it subject to a public hearing. Again, perhaps not surprisingly, Denver beats the rest of the jurisdictions here. It is, after all, the largest urban core in that area. And it permits on a pretty significant portion of its land multifamily housing. We see these in these light blue areas, the permitting that allows multifamily housing but subjects it to a public hearing. An interesting story that we've seen in other places across the country. We've generally found both through anecdotes from local leaders and housing advocates, and actually in research as well on this topic, that these areas that allow for multifamily housing to be permitted as of right, permitted subject to a public hearing, in those places, you don't actually see a lot of multifamily housing. Now, I'm sure Brian has a lot of stories from some of the developers and housing advocates that he has worked with. Those public hearing requirements sometimes deter applications from happening at all, because you never know what you are going to get after a public hearing. So just flagging that is something that is prevalent across the country, including in the Denver metro area. And I'll just, on the next slide, note that minimum lot sizes is a type of zoning restriction that, as Devin pointed out, can constrain housing development. We actually see in this part of the state not entirely onerous minimum lot sizes. So Devin told you our statewide stat, which is that much of the land in the state does have pretty large minimum lot sizes. These particular communities that we selected tend to hover in the very small minimum lot size mandates. And in some cases, that white shown on these graphs, there is no minimum lot size at all. So in a sense, these communities are doing better than the rest of the state, again, perhaps predictably, because we are located in the most populated areas and the most dense metro area in the state. We also thought it might be interesting to look at some of the large cities and compare them side by side. Do they all zone the same way? Are they all like Denver, or might there be some differences? And we found, in looking across a number of metrics, and in the report and in this presentation, we just look at these couple, the housing unit allowances and then the minimum lot sizes. But we found that there was some variation. So you see Denver is not at the top of this chart, it's third in this chart, it's in alphabetical order. But you see Denver permits on the left lots of single family housing, as does every other jurisdiction except for Fort Collins. And again, in the report, we explain a little bit about how Fort Collins code is a little bit different. On the right, we see variance in terms of 4 or more family permitting as of right. And again, you see that light blue showing where it's subject to a public hearing. But generally pretty permissive, especially when compared to even the chart that we just saw in the Denver metro area, and certainly across other communities in the state. So we do see here that principal cities, these larger cities that anchor metro areas in the state, are somewhat permissive when it comes to multifamily housing, but there is significant variation amongst them. In terms of minimum lot sizes too, we see some variation. We see a couple of outliers in Greeley and Pueblo, where there are some fairly large minimum lot sizes. In some communities, I should say, some of the larger minimum lot sizes can sometimes happen with overlays. And by the way, I see some questions in the Q&A, very happy to get those. But there are a number of communities in Colorado with overlays, including planned development overlays and other things that change the way underlying base districts work. So we've seen that in some places. But in any case, looking again at this chart, we do see that the principal cities, the larger cities, do not seem to have, on the whole, the same kinds of excessive lot sizes that we saw in other parts of the state. So again, from a policy standpoint, from a sort of planning standpoint, looking at the data in different ways, slicing it regionally, slicing it, looking at the Denver metro area, looking at different types of communities, might be something that we suggest policymakers continue to do. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tara, who's going to talk us through one last very cool tool that we have online that you can use right now during this presentation to check out the snapshot of zoning. Go ahead.
Thanks, Sarah. So again, the NZA also has a tool called zoning snapshots. A zoning snapshot is a visual statistical summary of any jurisdiction, county, or metro/micropolitan area published to the NZA. We will now show you what they look like. Here you can see the snapshots for the city of Durango and La Plata County. If you look hard, you can see that Durango on the left shows more permissive treatment for multifamily housing than the county does as a whole. These snapshots summarize some of the types of key statistics that appear in the Colorado report. You can generate your own zoning snapshot by going to zoningatlas.org/snapshots. Back to you, Sarah. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to point out one last section in the report. And this is a section where we get a chance to say, listen, with all these findings, is there anything that we, in looking around the country at zoning, might be able to recommend? So this is just 2 pages or 3 pages. It's certainly not exhaustive. But we decided that this section was worthwhile because we could look at the trends that we've seen in Colorado and maybe illuminate some of the things that we've seen in other states. So I do encourage you to check out that part of the report if you're interested in maybe our best practices advice. But the next slide shows those recommendations, just summarizes them. Our first recommendation is that the state legalize small lots. So again, Devin gave you that stat about the amount of land requiring 1 acre and 2 acre minimum zoning. It does seem, especially in those areas that are close into cities, maybe even in the small towns as well, that minimum lot size reform might be something that the state considers. We talk about loosening restrictions on multifamily housing, whether that's through permitting processes or maybe allowing more land to be used for multifamily housing, 2-unit, 3-unit housing, and certainly 4 or more unit housing. These types of housing developments are most affordable to people. And as Brian said, the state really does seem to be suffering an affordability crisis, and zoning does play a role in that. We have a couple of recommendations on accessory dwelling units. We recognize that the state legislature, that Governor Polis, that there's been a lot of leadership in Colorado, and we hope that we've adequately and appropriately recognized that in the report. Our suggestion is keep going, especially on the ADU provisions, to try to expand some of those provisions to all communities statewide. We've certainly seen ADU reform work well in other states. And those occupancy rules that Devin was talking about, those can also be reviewed. So it's not just owner occupancy that we've looked at, it's also prohibitions on renters, requirements that the occupant of the ADU be an elderly person, be a family member, be an employee. So these occupancy requirements extend beyond owner occupancy, and we just wanted to make sure we flag that in the report. We have a couple of recommendations. Of course, we suggest parking mandate reform being something that a number of other states have considered, and I believe North Carolina just passed or is on the verge of passing reforms that lift parking mandates statewide. On the plus side, that might save us some time in North Carolina. What do you guys think, Devin and Tara? Oh, we just put 0, perfect. But on the other hand, we know that local codes don't always change quickly to catch up to state rules. Colorado could become among the first states to eliminate parking mandates. And our last couple of recommendations are really maybe selfish in that they suggest that the legislature increase and expand accessibility to the zoning codes themselves. We had a really hard time finding some codes. I mentioned sometimes we had to have folks go in person. in 16 of the communities that we knew had zoning, so the 275 communities that we knew had zoning, we could not get their zoning codes. They're listed in the report. So if anybody is from those communities, please let us know if you can send us a zoning code, and they'll go up on the map. But we are really eager to help people access their codes, and we hope that making them electronically available and ensuring that somebody keeps a handle on amendments can make our task as we go through updating easier. So as I said, somewhat selfish. Of course, there's certainly a public interest in that as well. I think with that, I'll go to our last slide, and then we'll get to the questions, because we have some great questions. So please connect with us online. You have a link to our map and our website. That's our email address. If you have any updates, corrections, ideas, we're happy to hear them. And then we're on all kinds of social media. So I think maybe we'll stop sharing, or if you want to keep that last slide up, it's up to you. Diana Drogueras behind the scenes, the mastermind behind our presentation. So I'll defer to you, but I'm going to go right to the questions. And I'm going to throw the first one at Tara and Devin. And the question there is Brian's question, Brian Wheeler's question about, is there more granular data that you collect on multifamily housing? So what kind of data do we have about multifamily housing? So this presentation and the report is pretty basic. It just says, is it allowed or not? Do we collect anything else? I'll let you guys weigh in.
Yeah, I can start on that, especially on, so we have sort of 4 different main residential treatments that we track. So 1 family per lot, 2 family per lot, 3 family per lot, and 4+ family per lot. And so there's the question of if it's allowed, or if it's allowed with a public hearing, or prohibited. And then thinking about all of the granular pieces of information about what kind of lot size is required, especially with 4+ family housing, you often get per unit requirements. So we do track all of that too. We track different setback requirements. We track all the parking requirements, and particularly with multifamily, whether it's 2 family, 3 family, or apartment structures, you do get requirements that differ between studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, or larger apartments. We also track if that type of housing is required to be affordable, or if it's required to be restricted to the elderly, which happens sometimes. Didn't see too much of that in Colorado, but yeah, a lot of granular pieces of data regarding multifamily development in Colorado. Absolutely.
Tara, anything to add?
No, that's pretty much it. We do different aspects of development standards. Something I don't think Devin mentioned was density, maximum density. We also include parking, I think you already said, square footage, floor to area ratio. Yeah.
Lot coverage as well, lot coverage
Yes.
caps, height caps, both in feet and stories. And some of those appear on the map itself. We got a question about whether we actually have the parking requirements themselves. So I can say on that one, we include whether there's a parking requirement online, whether there's a height cap online, so you can actually go to an address and see that on the map. But and behind in our editor, we also log, for example, Devin gave the example of elderly units. So some jurisdictions will say that you would need 1 parking space if the unit is designated for elderly, 2 if it's designated, if it's sort of just a market rate non-elderly unit. And so we log all of that on the back end, but we figured it was a little too much information for the general public. So thank you both for those 2 questions. We had a question about color choices on the map. Were you guys involved in the color conversations? And do we have, maybe I can provide some historical data on that. So color choices. So Christina asked, can you explain your color choices? Why not use typical colors? And I think what you're referring to there are the colors that we see on planning maps, like yellow for residential. The really interesting thing is that, and Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the one who's looked at, I think, maybe more maps than almost anybody. on our team, we see a lot of inconsistencies in the jurisdictions maps in terms of colors. And I think traditionally the idea was yellow is residential and then other colors for industrial. But Tara, do you see those reflected consistently across jurisdictions, or do you see kind of a rainbow of fruit flavors?
Not at all. It's all over the board. Yeah.
So for us in picking the color scheme, and this might have been just slightly before Devin and Tara's time, we wanted to pick a color scheme for the map that was somewhat distinctive and that was simple as well. So the idea behind the primarily residential being a lighter purple and then mixed being a little bit of a darker purple, that's an increase in intensity. Then the non-residential color is related in sort of the grand scheme of things. It's not an orange, so it's not totally adverse to the purple, but in that peachish tan, the non-residential is related but fairly distinct. So we had a lot of conversations about those colors, and I think we realized, as Tara said, everybody is all over the map, no pun intended. So we're just going to try to forge a distinct color scheme there. We have one question, and Matt Frommer, and the question is, and this is where you guys get to play favorites. Are there any local codes in Colorado that stood out to you as being particularly permissive or pro-housing?
I must admit, I only worked on a handful of counties across the state of Colorado, but I did see a lot of good news coming out of Denver. I thought the code was really easy to use, even if it was pretty extensive, and even if there were two. I think especially the new code that is sort of a hybrid form-based and Euclidean with many different typologies and lots of districts with really good tables. I thought that was really permissive and pro-housing. I think also a good part to think about with permissive and pro-housing, I think, is also the ease of the code to be read and understood. So I think Denver, that is absolutely the case. In a lot of places with newer codes, including Rio Blanco County, I think some of these other counties even, they may not be the most permissive on housing just yet, but they do have really easy to use codes. And that I think does play a role in promoting good development.
Clarity does go a long way. Having a code with lots of footnotes and cross references and tables and later added sections, it can get really thorny. That's what makes our team so great, is that they can sift through all of that, but isn't it nice to have a clean code? We have a question about how to use the map to compare jurisdictions versus using the state looking at the state as a whole. Any additional tips, Tara or Devin, that you'd like to share on using the snapshots, or maybe opening them in different browsers and doing a side-by-side?
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely recommend doing like side-by-side snapshot comparison. In my opinion, that's going to get you the best like summary comparison. If you're looking for any kind of specific like filterable option on the atlas, then again, yeah, I'd recommend opening that and just in like two windows next to each other, and then jurisdiction by jurisdiction, you should be able to see like percent of land allowed for whatever you're filtering for.
We also have a new drop down on the snapshots page. So it's our website address /snapshots. And that drop down is for entire states. So it'll appear even if we haven't gone into a state or just have a couple of jurisdictions in the state. So be aware that at the top of that page, it'll say how many jurisdictions have actually been coded and how many don't. But if you want to look at the statewide feature, Colorado should pull up. And I should say too, that this report is a point in time. Jurisdictions change their codes every day. Even in the time that we released our report until now, we got a couple of code updates. We got a couple of folks saying, oh, wait, what about this overlay? And I mentioned overlays a little bit earlier in the presentation. So even between the time we released the report last month to an update that we posted yesterday, we had some updates, but we're going to try not to tinker with the report anymore. I do encourage you to keep track online because we upload updates, I think every day to somewhere in Colorado. We get inputs from local planners, from commissioners, from the general public. So we appreciate that. So just to say that those snapshots are not static, they update overnight. It takes 24 hours, but they do update overnight. So maybe they'll change, and maybe they'll change pretty significantly actually on the ADU side when we've inputted all of the Colorado local updates on ADUs. So stay tuned, but don't be surprised if those snapshots look different from month to month. Certainly from year to year, we hope they do look different. On that note, we got a question from Anya, and maybe another question related about how we do updates. So you guys have both worked on updating jurisdictions when they've changed their zoning. I think actually Denver changed its zoning, and we inputted the update there. Do you want to talk a little about how we did that?
For sure. Yeah. In Denver, we did record an update that occurred this year. There was incorporation of the state rules regarding ADUs, as well as a consolidation of a number of districts that were sort of repetitive. There were districts where it was like R1 or R1H, and turned out that they were the same thing, basically, when you actually looked under the hood. And so the latest edition of the code consolidated a lot of that information. And so in our tool, in our editor tool, we can essentially expire districts. So what it does is it takes that information that we had from the prior ordinance, save it in a sort of digital filing cabinet. And so then we can update with new information about either new districts, updated districts, and also change the geometry as those geometry changes happen too. I know Tara worked on the geometries for that. So that was a big one for Denver. We've done a few other jurisdictions in Colorado, but either way, we hope to be able to track more of this information over time. And I'm always checking my Google alerts for what places in the country have approved a new zoning code.
And in other jurisdictions, so we've just freshly finished Colorado. We'll expect to hope to do an update maybe sometime this calendar year, maybe early 2026. In other jurisdictions, we are maybe more intentional about how we do updates when we have completed the jurisdiction some months prior. So Connecticut is a state that we first reviewed in 2021. It was the first state that fully went up on the atlas. We have been systematically going through and tracking accessory dwelling unit changes. A couple of the larger cities actually had some pretty big rezonings. So we try to do that systematically. And for some of the most complicated states, Tara's working on California right now. I think we're about 75% done. And I think as soon as we finish that, we have hopefully some funding lined up to do a full state update. So California is one of those places that we're going to have to just keep going back to again and again in a fairly systematic way. Colorado, given the amount of regulatory activity, may also be one of those states. So hopefully that covers the question, both from the minute perspective or the sort of local jurisdiction specific perspective, and also from an organizational standpoint. As a nonprofit, of course, we operate based on funding. So we always look for buckets of funding to complete tasks like that. There's a question here about providing a zoning report card for Morgan for specific local governments. That's a great question. We have actually started talking internally about something like a zoning score. So we'll work more on that idea, taking into account all of the different types of regulations that local governments impose on housing. So I should add, we also collect information about the most common non-residential use that's allowed in the zoning districts that we've covered so far. So we do collect information about non-residential uses, but because housing is so central to, of course, all of our lives, to our economy, to our society, that those are the types of regulations we focus on most. So if we did a zoning report card for specific local governments, it would probably focus on the extent to which they permit or do not permit housing. There's a question here about protected land, and actually I might turn that over to Tara. How do we treat protected land in the map? Maybe I'll ask you that question, then I'll answer the second question that the commentator poses.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So for protected land, we just erase it from the zoning data because it cannot be developed. Sometimes it is left unzoned by the jurisdiction. Sometimes it's zoned something like open space or like protected areas. It just depends on how they decide to deal with it. But because it cannot be developed, we don't include it in our analysis.
And that database is the protected areas database of the United States. So it's not just us saying, oh, we think this is protected, so let's turn it green. It is the official PADIS map, as our geospatial analysts call it. Brian, I'm not sure if you're still available for answering questions, but there are a couple that might be most relevant to you. So I wanted to toss them your way if possible. The first one is, what are your legislative priorities this session, if you know now, given all the progress that the state has made in 2023 and 2024?
Thanks, Sarah, for the question, and whoever asked that question. We are still working on our legislative priorities. We do that by committee process at Housing Colorado. So we'll be working on those, talking with other stakeholders, legislators, executive branch folks to see what might be on the horizon. We worked, there was a couple of land use bills last year that we worked on a bit, and don't know if those are going to be coming back again this year. We have, and Sarah kind of lifted up Matt's question about kind of the best, are there some favorite communities out there? I will just kind of give a shout out to Matt Frommer from this Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. They're really doing a good job kind of monitoring the progress on the 2024 legislation and monitoring implementation of that now that we're past June 30th. They're really working hard in kind of a coalition to push local governments who are subject to those laws to make the changes. So kudos to Matt and Max over there who are really working hard on that. I think that that's one of the key places in all of these discussions is we can make state laws, but on the implementation side, that's a really vital component to policy making. And so we'll continue to do that. But as of now, our legislative priorities are still in progress.
And I have a second question for you, if you don't mind, which is from Chelsea. That last question was from an anonymous attendee. So this one's from Chelsea. What tools do you have to help us make our case to city councils to advocate for these changes?
We are working on a toolkit, an advocacy toolkit for local housing advocates, as well as again working with the folks at SWEEP and in making sure that folks are equipped to talk about these issues. Sometimes zoning changes and the like can happen quietly, and electeds want to make change quietly. And sometimes it takes kind of the full force of showing up and out showing out those who would be opposed to zoning changes. So there's different strategies in different communities, but I think one of the things that we're working on and others have worked on is really messaging around pro-housing solutions, what messages work for local electeds, as well as how do you organize in a community to again make that pro-housing voice really heard and really loud. So
Thank you for both of those answers. It looks like we just have 1 minute left, and there are a number of questions in the chat. I'm going to just address one last sort of overarching question, which is, how is the data going to be used in the future? Can you overlay vacancy rates, median home prices, and will we be able to access tabular data in the future? Yes, we hope all of that analysis is on the horizon. I'm not sure if we'll incorporate things like median housing prices or vacant land into the map itself. But that is the kind of analysis that we have started to do with other partners. It's something we could consider in Colorado as well. And we do hope by 2026 that we'll be able to build our own internal infrastructure up so that we can enable the kind of data sharing that a couple of the questioners asked. So please stay tuned. Please stay on our mailing list. Please stay in touch with us. We are building the spaceship while we're flying in it. So we are really, really appreciative of everybody's interest. We do want for this to be used in so many different ways. And this report is just the tip of the iceberg. So thanks, Brian, for all of your support with this. We know our conversations will continue, and we'll do everything that we can to support your work from a data standpoint as you work to make Colorado more affordable and accessible. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Be sure to follow us, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, Sarah.